This is the world according to Jen and Carolyn and Carolyn and Carolyn and Carolyn and Carolyn.
Hey everybody, hey Jen. We got an interesting one for you tonight. 100%. Yes, I feel like we've danced around this topic in a lot of previous episodes, but we thought it was time to dedicate an entire episode to cults. So,
I mean, boo-boo.
Yeah, boo. But it's time. You know, we've talked about Scientology back in July.
Yep.
We just did our first emergency podcast focused on a cult, the twin flame universe. But we've never dedicated an entire episode to dissecting cults. So, you know, it's interesting, right? Because I think a lot of people think of cults and they think of the most brazen, homicidal, suicidal cults out there. But not all cults are as blatantly strange and downright homicidal as like the Manson family, for
that
instance.
Was pretty bad.
that was as bad as you can get. Yeah. But, you know, some on the surface, they actually seem like beautiful ideas. Like Jonestown actually was conceived out of a beautiful idea, an integrated model, like a post-racial thing.
Yeah.
During a time when, well, racism is still very much alive and well, but in the 70s and the 80s, even more so.
Then it got weird.
And then it got real weird.
Real fast.
We're going to get into that. Yeah. You know, it wasn't all like Kool-Aid and mass suicide, at least not first when it started. So, you know, we're going to talk about the evolution of cults, the charisma of cult leaders, and the psychology of joining a cult today. Yeah. So, Carolyn, do you remember the first cult you remember hearing about?
I do. And it was David Koresh. I remember that coming out, maybe I was in like 4th or 5th grade, probably. And weirdly, I thought I had a crush on him.
That is weird.
I thought he was handsome, except for the glasses.
I mean, he was cute.
But I didn't, I remember.
Also a pedophile.
Yeah, that was shielded for me on Entertainment Tonight. But I remember in school we talked about it because we all were like, he looks like Jesus. Like, is this
well,
Jesus?
He thought he was Jesus.
And I went to a Lutheran school, and so there was this big conversation about, and I remember,
it looks like white Jesus.
A bunch of my friends were like, well then, was Jesus real? Like, we kind of were like, but he looked like Jesus, and it got really bad. The pastor had to come in.
Oh yeah, you started questioning. I like it.
I like, get this Jew out of here. She's causing trouble. I'm like Jesus,
wreaking havoc. Yes, undermining white Jesus. How dare you?
So I remember that, and then of course, because I was so into 60s culture and murder mysteries, Manson family was very fascinating for me. And I don't know, I've seen him in enough shows, and you start listening to him for too long, and you're like, he's crazy, but wait, he's kind of making sense. Wait, no, he's great. Wait, but also, we are sheeple. But wait, no, I get it.
It's kind of like Ted Kaczynski. And his critique on technology and how technology is stripping us of our humanity. You're like, yeah, right on, Ted Kaczynski. Yes. But the mail bomb's not cool, bro.
Every time I think of Ted Kaczynski, though, I think of Will Ferrell playing him.
Oh, yeah.
At the college reunion. He's like, I've been doing a lot of writing.
He's pretty much the perfect Ted Kaczynski. But
anyway,
the first cult I remember hearing about, of course, was the Manson family.
Yeah.
But the one I remember being super interested in was Heaven's Gate. And probably because it happened when I was a teenager, and that's when I was into super weird shit. Same. Not that I'm not still into super weird shit, but particularly when I was like 14 or 15, I remember me and my friend Melina, shout out to Melina, we had a Time magazine, and it was profiling Heaven's Gate after the mass suicide.
Very cool.
And we cut out all the pictures and taped them to my front door, and my mom came home, she's like, what the fuck are you guys doing?
That's awesome.
Yeah, we went above and beyond in the I don't know, macabre teen department.
Well, it was, you know, you're teenagers, you're supposed to find tension in things.
It was a lot. So anyway, so those are my childhood memories. What do yours look like? Okay, so I found this to be interesting. This is a list comprised of the 6 most infamous cults, according to Business Insider. Cult business. So, number 1, the Manson family. We know they murdered 7 people over the course of 2 nights. They tried to start a fucking race war.
Well, and all the celebrities that were hooked in with that too. The Beach Boys and God, poor Sharon Tate. And that made it such a media sensation.
Yes. And I learned...
bizarre.
It was bizarre. And I learned recently that the Manson family had a hit list. One of the people on the list was Frank Sinatra. Not only did they want to kill Frank Sinatra, they wanted to use his skin to make, I think, wallets and sell them on Hollywood Boulevard. Yeah. At least they were industrious. I don't know. They were entrepreneurial.
Oh, man.
Crazy.
That's fucking
Frank
weird.
Sinatra's like, whew, dodged a bullet there. I imagine him being heavily armed, though.
Yeah, me too.
Then Heaven's Gate's number 2. Members of Heaven's Gate were told that God was an alien. 39 members died by suicide. I had never heard of this. The cult of Shinrikyo, Japanese, was founded in the 80s by Shoko Ashara. He claimed to be Christ and at one point garnered tens of thousands of followers across the world. His teachings started out as spiritual and then became increasingly violent.
That tracks.
Awesome. Cult members even paid money to drink his blood. Whoa. They're like a vampire cult.
Yeah.
On March 20th, 1995, members of Shinrikyo left 5 bags filled with a toxic nerve agent on 3 Tokyo train lines during rush hour.
Oh, I remember this.
Ooh, I do too. That part I remember. I didn't remember the name of the cult or that it was a cult.
I had no idea that was attached to it.
So passengers began choking and throwing up.
No.
13 people died.
Oh, no.
5,800 people were injured.
Whoa.
As months went by, the cult tried and failed to attack other subway stations with deadly cyanide. I think they put that dude to death. I don't know. And then the next one is the Branch Davidians.
Yeah.
Your crush, David Koresh. He believed that he could talk to God. Yeah. He also thought that the world was ending. The cult leader managed to convince more than 100 people to move to a compound, Waco, Texas, outside of Waco, Texas, following his teachings, which included his belief that men could have multiple wives, including girls as young as 10.
Gross.
Yeah.
Now
pedophile.
Joanna Gaines is just Farmhouse. What's that show?
Who's Joanna Gaines? Was she a Branch Davidian?
Wasn't that the Magnolia? No, it's the place at Target, the chick that has that home edit show.
Oh, yeah.
And now that's in Waco, Texas. Nothing. She's just in Waco, Texas.
Oh, okay.
Waco's not just for Branch Davidians.
Was she in the cult? God damn it. I'm not following. Okay, good.
That farmhouse style is now what we know from Waco, Texas, not just the Branch Davidians.
That's cool. I need another association.
Shut up,
Waco.
Carolyn.
Yeah. I don't know what you're talking about.
I'm sober.
I'm the one that's drinking. Then there's something called the Children of God. It was established in the late 60s by David Byrne.
Trigger warning.
Who's a traveling preacher. They believed in free love that reportedly involved female members recruited with sex, sometimes known as flirty fishing. Whoa. And survivors say children were regularly abused. Oh, no.
We had to study this a lot in school.
Dude, I didn't know.
Trauma and the kids that were born into this shit.
Being born into a cult, that's awful.
I'm going to talk about that.
Okay, did you know, though, that Rose McGowan and Joaquin Phoenix grew up in Children of God?
No.
Apparently they did.
That's awful.
That is insane. Then we have Jim Jones and the People's Temple. In 1955, Jones founded the People's Temple in Indianapolis. He grew concerned that a nuclear attack would fall in the area. So he moved back in the day, 1955, that was actually a reasonable fear.
Yeah.
He moved his congregation to Eureka, California, which he thought would be safer. Paranoia struck again in 1977, this time born out of media attention, and Jones moved the People's Temple to a settlement in Guyana dubbed Jonestown. So one of our local leaders, Jackie Spears, who just retired, she's a congresswoman for a really long time. So U.S. Congressman Leo Ryan decided to visit the People's Temple in Guyana in 1978 to investigate abuse. Yeah. And these motherfuckers started firing on them. And this was right after everybody had been forced to drink it was Flavor Aid, not Kool-Aid. And over 900 people were killed. I cannot watch the footage of Jonestown. Too many children were killed.
It's so sad.
It's too sad.
Little feet.
Yeah. Oh, God.
Sorry,
I can't.
Jen. I'm
no,
sorry.
Stop it. Stop going all Holocaust with like a bucket full of children's shoes on me. God
it's not
damn
right.
it.
I know.
It's awful. So, I think we need to talk about cult leaders, because I think you could tell from our description, or rather Business Insider's description of the 6 most infamous cults. All of those cults had very charismatic, very persuasive leaders. And that is the thing that most cults have in common. This charismatic leader who's able to easily convince people to follow them. In fact, all the cults, like I said, we mentioned, were like that.
Yeah.
Charlie Manson may not be folks' idea of charismatic and seductive, but his family would certainly disagree. Women who, when he was on trial, the ones who didn't end up in jail because they hadn't committed murder, were literally crawling through the streets of Los Angeles on their hands and knees with their heads shaved, making their way to the court. Crazy. Yeah, I don't want to call anybody crazy, but you might need some therapy if you're into that kind of shit. So, Carolyn, can you maybe break down for our listeners what some of the most common characteristics of cult leaders are?
Yes. Well, I came across an article that referred to them as Zen devils, which I thought was a pretty good use of words.
I like that.
Psych Mechanics article written by Hanan Parvez cites 14 characteristics of a cult leader. And as you mentioned, kind of all cult leaders tend to have these tendencies, but the key distinction is the leader themselves and the group members having excessive admiration and adoration of the followers. The article goes on, sorry, that made no sense. The article, never mind. Moving on. The article goes on to identify, I'm on Dryuary.
Does that, that's interesting. So does that mean that the leader, the group, the members leader, of the group are enamored with the leader?
Yes, and they always have these kind of similar characteristics. The article goes on to identify cult leaders as combining many of the same qualities that successful conventional leaders have. And there's actually 16 qualities of conventional leadership. And if you study business, these are things you'll learn, and usually a combination of a couple of them. But ultimately, here's the main distinction. Cult leaders will always cause harm because they achieve their status through dominance, real or projected, as in think of how like the Wizard of Oz was all powerful, but when you move the curtain out of the way, it was just an old charlatan behind the curtain. So dominance exists in the human and animal world. We know that. But Parvez writes that males have a lot to gain by raising their status, and doing so helps them gain better access to resources and potential mates. And this explains why almost all cult leaders are men. Now, there are female cult leaders. We're not going to talk about it.
We just watched Love Has Won.
Yes. And, there's a different mentality going on there, which I'm sure we can do a whole podcast about that. But we're sticking just to the dudes for now. Because they're so overarchingly, statistically speaking there. So, Parvez goes on to note that you can achieve dominance in slow, long path of hard work and success. Or like I said, you could be like the Wizard of Oz and have that projected dominance, which is a confidence, and it has this magnetic effect. And I think that's the feeling you have even when you listen to some of these cult leaders, that magnetism or that charismaticness, which sounds like such a terrible adjective to describe them because they're psychotic. But it makes people believe you have high status, and people want to follow those who have confidence and firmly believe in whatever it is they believe in. And people believe that by following a dominant alpha male, they'll be able to also raise their status somehow. And then they'll have better lives and they'll be able to rival human groups. That's sort of the animal version of that. That's not far off, right? But how do you know if you're observing projected dominance? And so here's where we're going to get into those 14 different factors of an intellectual, revolutionary, charismatic, conviction of belief, arrogance. Jen, do any of these qualities remind you of any type of pathological personality type?
Oh, no, maybe like a narcissist?
Yeah.
So that's a recurring theme.
Number one, these men are narcissists.
Yep.
Again, charismatic, dominant, demand obedience, claim supernatural powers, arrogant and boastful. They are almost always sociopathic and psychopathic. Yeah. And the difference being that they do kill people. They do incite murder, even if it's the murder of their own members. Yeah. They're delusional. They're persuasive. They're authoritative and controlling, exploitative. This I thought was interesting. Sometimes they're underdogs. And intolerant of criticism, but they're also visionaries. And what woman doesn't love a guy who thinks he knows what he's talking about.
Well, it's interesting too. Like I'm thinking of Hitler. I don't know why when you're talking about underdogs, right? Like,
yeah.
He was a dude who desperately wanted to be an artist and was rejected and told his art was garbage. And it's really fascinating to me also that his idea of what an ideal human looked nothing like him.
Mm-hmm.
Blonde, blue-eyed. Like this was somebody who was projecting or taking his insecurities and projecting them outward and using them to, exploit, murder, all that shit.
Yeah.
It's just, it's so fascinating. But I mean, Hitler was at least initially an underdog.
Yeah.
At Stalin, in fact, Trotsky and Lenin in the Russian Revolution used to call him Comrade Card Index because he was so organized. He was also really hot. Have you seen pictures? Index? Comrade Card Index.
Of Stalin?
Because he always used to he would just take notes. He was very studious. He'd take notes. He'd have index cards.
That's interesting.
He just kind of flew under the radar. But then the time came for him to step it up.
Yeah.
It's interesting too, if you read Malcolm Gladwell's The Tipping Point, why some people rise to this level of like dominance and infamy or fame.
Yeah.
Whereas others do not.
Yeah.
It's fascinating. Anyway.
Well, they have these characteristics.
Yeah. I'm on a tangent.
I know, but that's very, very interesting. If you look at a lot of history and a lot of business.
Yeah.
Minus the sociopathic, psychopathic part.
Yeah.
This is how a lot of industries are formed. It's someone who's just that fucking full of themselves.
Yeah.
No one's going to stop them. And again, use that for good, use that for evil.
Yep.
So
no, it's true. It's totally true. There's a lot of crossover here, which is the point that I made in the intro that is going to accompany this episode, which is, do you think you're too smart to join a cult? Think again.
Mm-hmm.
Think about, I don't want to implicate any particular corporation, but if you think about like the culture of that particular corporation, and the indoctrination.
You mean all the products that are in front of me right
now? They're everywhere. They're everywhere. But
I'm married to this cult.
It's true. It's true.
Cult.
But I mean, it's not that far fetched.
Yeah.
I mean, we look at these very extreme examples.
Yeah.
But how inclined are we really as human beings to follow somebody who claims to have answers?
I'm so glad you're curious about that, Jen.
I am. We're going to get to that more. So, we talked about cult leaders. What about the people who join cults? A lot of these people are seemingly, I don't like using the word normal, but I'm going to use it, educated, successful. So what gives? I was struck, over and over again when I watch anything about Heaven's Gate, how absolutely brilliant those members are. They're all intellectuals. They all have a science-based background, or many of them do, yet they're falling for this bullshit. God's an alien. And then before you know it, you're dead under a purple shroud after you took some dosed pudding. What gives, right? So let's talk about it. So according to this Daily Beast article we found by Barbara Gergel, she starts off by writing, I have bad news for you.
Oh no, Barbara.
If you are a happy, well-adjusted person with a loving family and a degree, then congratulations. You are exactly the kind of person that can be recruited into a cult. Bingo. She goes on to say, have you ever been talked into getting the extra warranty at the car dealership? Have you ever taken a friend's free kickboxing class and signed up for an 18-month membership?
In my 20s.
During your post-workout high, right? Have you ever found yourself frantically cleaning chocolate cake off a hotel wall, smashed there by your blackout drunk sorority sister, and asked yourself, how did I get there?
That's a no for me.
But I think I am in a sorority.
I think I am still a member at Bally's, though.
Sorry, I spilled this cough. I'm disgusting. Yeah. So it's all kind of connected in terms of the psychology. So cults know exactly what they're doing. According to psychologist Stephen Eichel, he says, in fact, they specifically look for people who are idealistic and optimistic. And a 2017 study of former cult members found that 61% had more than 12 years of education. So that means college education. Common sentiments shared by former cult members. They felt instantly welcomed and accepted. Cults make you feel special. They totally love bomb you. They prey on your desire to be the best version of yourself, convincing you that the group is helping you achieve everything you wanted. Deborah Layton, who's a former People's Temple survivor of the People Temple member and survivor of the Jonestown Massacre, explains it's like an abusive relationship.
Yes.
Makes total sense. This sentiment is echoed by many other former cult members. No one goes on a first date and says, hello, I'm an abuser, because no one would stay. Once members start to question themselves, it becomes self-reinforcing logic loop. That makes sense. Only stupid people join cults, and I am not stupid, therefore this cannot be a cult, can it? People who have been deprogrammed from cults are overwhelmingly intelligent, educated people. And they'll tell you that the crazy things they believed made perfect sense at the time. Cults start off just like groups that we're already familiar and comfortable with. Also, a lot of these cults seem to start out with good intentions.
We're to save you from aliens.
Right?
I don't want to go to an alien probing.
You want to go on a spaceship, bitch? I got you. Just take this pudding. Eat this pudding and die.
I don't like pudding.
Put on these Nikes. I love pudding. What's wrong with you? No. Chocolate pudding is the shit.
Butterscotch.
Butterscotch is great too.
Okay.
I will not fuck with tapioca though.
No, me neither.
That's gross. That's weird. It's weird. Also, so as I said, some cults start out with good intentions. Like the People's Temple, for instance. According to this Rediscovering Black History article, the Jonestown tragedy was a culmination of years of James Warren, Jim Jones, efforts to create his idea of a utopia away from the prying eyes of the United States government. That's where the paranoia came in.
I'm down with that.
I'm down with that too.
Don't tax me.
But then he goes on. Jones was a fervent communist. Okay, that's
all right.
cool.
I'm all right with that.
And he came to religion as a means of spreading his communist message of combating the inequality created by racial discrimination and capitalism. I'm on board right now.
Me too, I'm in.
Jones was a proponent of integration and was actively involved in the fight for the equal treatment of African Americans. So, 70% of the People's Temple, the membership was African American. He had a temple on Geary in Fillmore. Did you know that?
No way, I didn't know that.
Yeah, or off of Geary.
We gotta find that.
I know where it is.
Oh.
I can take you there.
Cool.
Yeah, it's really close to where I used to work. So yeah, there's a Bay Area connection. But, there were all these black folks who in the 70s and the 80s were enduring all this terrible racism. And here comes Jim Jones, this man who I think adopted... I think maybe one of his kids was Korean. I don't remember where he grew up in that situation, but he was all about integration and treating people with equity. And so, people who had been disenfranchised and treated poorly all their lives were, of course, attracted to this message.
So what happened?
Yeah.
How did it go so wrong?
Things got ugly because they became violent, and then sexual abuse and forced labor happened. Jones was also paranoid, delusional, and mentally ill. Yeah, he was always worried about the CIA coming at you and other intelligence agencies. And so, there was all this fear and paranoia and anxiety and anger. He preyed on the idea that these entities would steal the children away or murder them. So he was scaring the shit out of these parents.
Yeah.
He would make the men fight. It was weird. So you have all these black folks living in a time that was even more racist than now. And here's this dude, this charismatic leader, preaching peace and love and integration and self-determination. And let's go start our own thing.
Yeah.
Where we're untouched by all these oppressive fucking systemic issues. And so, you have altruistic white people, you have people of color, and they're all thinking, cool, we're going to create an awesome society. We're not going to have to deal with poverty or racism or hunger anymore. And then surprise, Jones is a fucking psycho.
Yeah.
And what the fuck are you supposed to do when you're stuck with no money and no ability to get out? And guess what? When U.S. Congress people came to try to see what was up, they were shot and some were killed. So how the fuck do you get out? You're in too deep at that point.
Yeah, you don't.
Carolyn, can you say a little bit more about the psychology of joining a cult so I can stop ranting?
Oh, God. All right. Well, okay. Let's take a trauma-informed language pause here. Let's stop calling it joining a cult.
Okay.
All right, people don't, this is from Roseanne Henry, and a member of the ICSA recovery workshops. I did not write down where I got what that acronym is, unfortunately. But just go with me on this. So people don't join cults. They get involved in groups that are led to believe and represent high ideals.
Okay, that makes sense.
When ex-members have been pulled, and this is from the ICSA recovery workshops, they consistently gave their reasons for, quote, joining their groups: idealism, friendship, love, freedom, community, mission, sincerity, salvation, enlightenment, and spiritual high.
Yep.
So most people, like you said, don't join cults, and we want to avoid at all costs any victim blaming that can be placed on someone who is listening or knows someone who may find themselves in this situation. I'll take a page from Ken Hardy. If you don't
love me some Ken Hardy.
Me too. I know, we're right when
I got to see him.
Important. Did you really?
Yeah.
Privileged bias and subjugated self. But you know, when you're doing research and education, I think this is something that you and I can go, well, we're educated. I would never do that. That's my judgment, right?
Yeah.
And so when I find myself having a judgment, I have to look at that with a lot of curiosity and go, where does that come from? Mm-hmm. And I think in order to have some compassion for these victims, we have to put ourselves in that mindset that, you know, we're talking about human rights after all, at the end of the day. And cults are brainwashing and mind hacking and using the psychology of influence to indoctrinate their members systematically, and it's incredibly powerful. This is why it's important to understand that we are not talking about how intelligent a person is or how loved they are by their family, because they're not themselves when they are in that state of the cult. They are a different person. And guess what? This is not exclusive to religious groups. So beware. This happens in politics. This happens in multi-level marketing and pyramid schemes, media, and yes, even in a relationship. Especially if he's an abusive narcissist. And you're right, Jen, he's not going to tell you that on the first date.
You're right.
So I found a wonderful Smithsonian article. It's called The True Story of Brainwashing and How It Shaped America. So in the let's go back, little history here, as you and I started off with, 1950s, 1960s. This is the height of the Cold War. And the United States government feared that Soviet, Chinese, and North Korean agents were using mind control to brainwash U.S. prisoners of war in Korea. Have you ever watched The Manchurian Candidate?
No, but I'm familiar. I've seen excerpts.
Should I watch that?
I think we both should.
Okay, let's.
It's supposedly amazing.
So, if you want to learn more about that time period, watch that movie. It is supposed to be very amazing. Journalist Edward Hunter wrote an article in the Miami Herald in 1950, and later wrote a book that described how Mao Zedong's Red Army used terrifying ancient techniques to turn Chinese people into mindless communist automatons. And he called automatons. Yeah, automatons.
Close. Tomato.
He called this hypnotic process brainwashing. A word for word translation from Z now. Sorry, I'm probably not adding the correct Mandarin inclination on that.
I know. We're from San Francisco. We should know better.
And that literally Z is wash and brain is now. Okay. So again, we're not talking about from Zoolander that you use male models to brainwash. That's a funny version of this. But same thing. The Prime Minister of Malaysia.
The Prime Minister of Malaysia.
So,
relax. Don't do it.
So this idea of threat of brainwashing was very real, and it was everywhere. The U.S. military denied the charges made by the soldiers that confessions couldn't explain how they had been coerced to make them. They kind of were like, these guys are just weak. But it also, you know, what could explain these behaviors of the soldiers besides brainwashing? The idea of mind control flourished in pop culture with movies like Invasion of the Body Snatchers, which I also haven't seen. Have you seen that? Okay. Yep. And I mentioned The Manchurian Candidate, and people whose minds were wiped clean and controlled by outside forces. Even the FBI director, J. Edgar Hoover referred to thought control repeatedly in his book, Master of Deceit, The Story of Communism in America and How to Fight It. I know, I have mixed feelings, right? So 1980, this I didn't know. American Psychiatric Association even gave it credence, including brainwashing under dissociative disorders.
Oh, wow.
I know. In the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistics Manual number 3. I have a new mission where I want to find all the old DSMs. So on your antique store hunting, if anyone out there can find some old DSMs for me, please message me. I will buy them from you.
A brain in a jar. I can find it all.
So anyway, so we have Chinese Soviet communism really uncovering a machine or method to rewrite one's mind or whatever. So anyway, Robert J. Lipton, one of the psychiatrists who worked with one of the veterans after the Korean War, later studied doctors who aided Nazi war crimes, listed 8 criteria for thought reform. And the term, like I said, which is what Mao Zedong used for brainwashing.
Yeah.
They include milieu control, mystical manipulation, planned spontaneity, a demand for purity, confession, sacred science, loading language, doctrine over person, and dispensing of existence. So if you are having...
Some heavy shit.
I know, right? So let's go back to kind of the spirituality of a cult, right? Because they usually have a spiritual component.
Sure.
So when you are having a religious experience or some type of shift in consciousness, you are searching for meaning, and that's a good thing. But in that search, you don't ever reach an endpoint.
Okay.
The only person who did was Buddha, and then I don't know what happened. But I'm Jewish. I'm not a Boo Jew. So, but in other words, you're always growing. There's no point in your learning, whether it's about your education or who you are, where you just go, I'm done.
Yeah.
Ding, timer's up. So you should
you shouldn't.
Exactly. Well, that should be your first red flag. You are never done. But in a cult, you somehow find the Holy Grail, so to speak. And it comes with this kind of superiority that you must help save others who need to get to this endpoint with you. And there's
like any religion, though.
Well,
when you think about it, it's like, I have to help. Well, any religion that proselytizes.
Say more.
No, well, there are like evangelicals, for instance.
Yes.
Their entire mission.
Yes.
Is I have to save the souls of people who aren't yet saved and committed to Jesus Christ.
And I'm the prophet, or I'm at the pinnacle of this, and I'm a man.
Like my ex-husband, his parents who were evangelicals.
I was like, your ex-husband did this? I'm like, oh no.
No. His parents were, and I'd like wake up in the morning when I'd stay at their place and find Jesus paraphernalia in my purse. Because that was the goal.
Yeah.
Was to
save you.
Mission. Yeah, mission driven.
Well, and I think any spiritual, anything that's asking you to investigate into yourself, you are always asked to keep growing. You never stay stagnant. You're never, even in the yoga class I was in today, they're like, you're never done with a pose. There's always a little bit more breath you can take. There's always a little more stretch. There's a little more strength. There's always somewhere else to go.
Okay.
And so, this kind of superiority is a big red flag. And also a lot of these programs use sleep deprivation and you're constantly moving, you're constantly doing, you're
easier
isolated.
To manipulate when you're weak and sleep deprived.
And you're also never experiencing negative thoughts about what you're doing, what you're being told the cult itself is doing, and specifically the leader.
Well, when you're insulated, I mean, I think that's the point of keeping you away from your family and going to an isolated location. It's like, if this is all you know, it becomes normal.
Yes.
And why question it?
And they all have this schema. It's not ironic.
It's not.
And it's all connected to this type of thought reform that we know can, like what you said, can take someone like Hitler and make it a mass cultural experience where you go, how did that happen?
Yep.
It didn't happen overnight, right? It happened systematically.
Yeah.
So this subversion of the mind occurring in which you no longer decide your own thoughts or think for yourself is a big problem. Leon Festinger is Have you ever heard of him in cognitive dissonance?
Sounds familiar. Yeah.
So Leon Festinger was a social psychologist in the 1950s, and he had this theory that suggests that people experience psychological discomfort when they hold two or more conflicting beliefs, values, or ideas at the same time. This discomfort is called cognitive dissonance.
Okay.
I love teaching this to people because it's one of those ones where it's a theory I've learned a million times and it always blows my mind.
Okay.
Cognitive dissonance was first investigated by Festinger, arising out of participant observations study of a cult that believed that the earth was going to be destroyed by a flood.
Sweet.
And what happened to its member, particularly the really committed ones who had given up their homes and jobs to work for this cult. The flood didn't happen. So while fringe members were more inclined to recognize that they had made fools of themselves and put the experience down, committed members were more likely to reinterpret the evidence to show that they were right all along.
That's like Heaven's Gate.
Yeah, exactly. The earth was not destroyed because of the faithfulness of the cult members.
Yep.
So
that's exactly what happened with Heaven's Gate, because they anticipated the earth would be destroyed by a comet or a meteor or whatever. Didn't happen. And then they reinterpreted.
Yes.
And everybody kind of, changed trajectory, but they were on board.
Yeah. Well, and it's, again, you either have to change your belief or change your behavior.
Yeah.
And most people, wanting to change any belief or behavior is uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And unfamiliar.
Right.
And so we're pleasury people. We want to resist that.
Yeah.
And also there was the concept of, really being able to overcome dissonance is you have to come to believe that what you're doing could have a negative impact. And remember I told you that there is no negative thought of the cult or the leader.
Right.
In fact, if you start having that, we're going to go right into shaming you or doing something
Re-educating your ass.
Something's wrong. You're starting to think for yourself.
Yep.
Something's going on.
Yeah, it's time to reindoctrinate your ass. No, that makes a lot of sense. So, how do you identify a cult? Because it could be like, I'm going to join this group. They seem like they have altruistic intentions. This is awesome.
Yeah.
We touched briefly on some of the common attributes of a cult in our Twin Flames episode, but I think it's time to delve a little deeper. So, according to a CBS article that we found, up to 10,000 cults still exist today in the U.S., according to psychologist, again, Steve Eichel. He's like the renowned cult expert. His name keeps coming up. So, if you want to learn more about cults, apparently Steve Eichel is your fucking guy.
Cool.
So, he's a recognized international cult expert and president of the International Cultic Studies Association. He outlined several ways to identify cults. He says, most cults are extremely small and very deliberately try to stay under the radar. This is what he said to 48 Hours, which is one of my favorite shows. That and Dateline. Unless they commit a crime, unless they do something that draws attention to them, negative attention or criticism, we generally don't even know about them.
That's true.
We know about the big ones, right? We know about the ones
scary.
It is. So, Eichel's going to tell us what constitutes a cult. He says, beware of any kind of pressure. That's probably the single most important advice I can give anyone.
Especially if they tell you, no pressure.
Yeah, any kind of pressure to make a quick decision, which is like what scammers do, right?
Yes.
It's like, you don't have time to think. You gotta make a decision now.
Something really bad's gonna happen.
Yep.
But I'm your friend. Let me try and help you.
Jeez. Thanks, David Koresh. Be wary of any leader who proclaims him or herself of having special powers or special insight. And, of course, divinity. Yes. This is another one. The group is closed. So, in other words, although there may be outside followers, there's usually an inner circle that follows the leader without question and that maintains a tremendous amount of secrecy. The group uses deceptive means, typically to recruit new members. Then brainwashing. Mm-hmm. That's what they're talking about here. Typically, cults also exploit their members, mostly financially. Mm-hmm. Hello, Scientology and Twin Flames. Also, a very important aspect of the cult is the idea that if you leave the cult, horrible things will happen to you. This is important, and it's important to realize because that people outside of the cult are potential threats to members. Mm-hmm. So, that's a big one. And that's why these cult leaders isolate you from your family. Yeah. Your family's on the outside going, hi, what's going on? Yeah. Like there's clearly something wrong. We want to come get you.
Yeah.
We want to help you out. Just like in that Love has won.
Yeah.
And sometimes people just are not yet in a place where they want to be taken from a cult because they don't realize that what they're in is a negative thing.
And being told by others that it is. We talked about this in the Scientology. That actually is what you're being told people will say. So again, that dissonance of, wow, this is all making sense. And what they told me would happen is happening.
Yes. Because
it's very powerful.
It's so stupid. It's so calculated. It's like the, what is it called? The suppressive people in Scientology.
Yeah.
You're a suppressive person.
Well, and you know that feeling, because this I can relate to, and we've talked about this before as well. When you know, like when I've been dating someone that I know is not the right person for me, I hide it. I don't talk about it as much, and then it becomes that piece where I'm like, oh God, if I'm going to tell people about this, what are they going to say about it? It's embarrassing.
Right.
You know, so they manipulate that.
Sometimes when you realize that you're wrong, you double down.
Yes.
I don't remember what that effect is called, but we see a lot with right-wingers. I'm picking on y'all. Actually, no right-wingers listen to this show.
I was going to say, I don't think so, unless they're trying to...
We're not the show for them. Yeah. So, you know, we all know there are people who escape cults, but it's really hard to do it because cults are like abusive relationships. So, Carolyn, can you talk about what may be happening psychologically for a cult member who wants to get out, as well as what might happen, what might be going on psychologically in the aftermath of that escape?
Yeah. So unless you were born into a cult, which is a whole separate conversation, someone who wants to get out, or more likely their family and friends are trying to help them escape, is existing. I talked about that dual identity. There's the identity of the cult member in the present, and then there's the person they were before being indoctrinated into the cult. So Steve Hassan, I think it's Hassan and not Hassan, PhD, you know, it's funny, a lot of these researchers and masters or doctorates, they were members of cults themselves.
Fascinating.
And getting out, they became fascinated with how could this have happened? And so Steve Hassan is one of those. He's a mental health professional and an expert in undue influence tactics used by authoritarian leaders and destructive cults. And Hassan offers a 4-step reality testing formula developed over 45 years of research, starting after leaving a cult that deceptively recruited him. And the bottom line is that brainwashing is, this comes from Hassan, brainwashing is not just something that happens in a cult. We are all susceptible.
Yeah.
So I love this model he created. It's called the BITE, B-I-T-E, model of authoritarian control across the influence continuum. I love a good continuum.
What's the acronym? What's BITE?
I'll tell you, Jen.
Tell me.
Wait, be patient.
I don't have any patience.
So influence is a continuum. One end having ethical and informed consent. Who, what, where, when, how. You know, so think of like when you're joining a gym.
Okay.
You know all the details. They come right out and tell you.
Kind of. I don't feel that way when I'm signing my Verizon contract. Oh, but there's no contract now. It's just you're going to pay for this phone for 2 years.
Let me say, when you come see me for psychotherapy, I give you all the informed.
Thank you for being better than Verizon.
You're welcome, Jen. My good ethical education here from USF.
I like it.
So you have that on one end of the continuum. The other end is total deception, lying, withholding, distorting the factors, and being influenced by behavior, information, thought, and emotions. BITE.
Got it.
So I thought this was a pretty cool lens to do any decision making.
Okay.
You know, if you're thinking about dating someone, or you're thinking about buying a product, or signing a lease, I don't know, whatever you want to do, you know, it's this idea that Hassan notes that the end of subversion is this universal truth that all human mind and psyche can be put back in homeostasis when you remind the person who was the identity before the cult.
Oh, okay.
It's my mind. I can decide what I think for myself. And I will be using that starting Monday with my clients, because that's a really good line. It's just simple and true. So being part of a culture, any totalitarian recruitment is going to, we talked about how isolation, engulfment, fear as common factors.
Okay.
Remember Leon Festinger's cognitive dissonance? Mm-hmm. So dissonance can be reduced in one of 3 ways: changing existing beliefs, adding new beliefs, and reducing the importance of the previous beliefs in general. So The mode of dissonance reduction frequently presents problems, though, for people, like I said, because it's difficult for people to change well-learned behavioral responses. So you have to integrate another systematic method of reality testing and deprogramming. Jeez. And see, this is where it gets complicated, right?
Yeah.
You're going to have to integrate actual ex-members because they're going to be the most powerful. They're going to know the most information. And you're going to have to do education on brain control and brainwashing. So Hassan's reality testing, I said it's 4 parts. Disconnect. He even talks about how if you disconnect from your cell phone and media for about a week, you will change your behavior.
I bet.
Around what's going on.
Yeah.
But he said even just a week is reinforcing. If you were to get someone out, you have to remove them from that environment. And sometimes that's forcible. And like you said with Jonestown, well, these are protected places where you could get really hurt if you tried to do that.
People are armed.
And you're going to talk about this later, but is it legal to even go in and kidnap that person when you're trying? They do that a lot in Mennonite societies or in, what's it called? Amish or... well, Amish are nice, aren't they? What's the other ones?
I don't know.
The Amish are cool. What are they? Utah people? Cool.
Oh, Mormons? Oh, there we go.
Yeah. Anyway, so education on models of authoritarian control. Because again, these are educated people. So if you start talking to them that way, there's a chance that you can help them basically reform that behavior and that idea.
Yeah.
Seek out critics of the former cult members specifically, and honest self-reflection. And like I said, unless you're born into it, you can sort of say, hey, how did I really get here? Was I tricked?
Yeah.
And Hassan was saying that, he was at his student union and these 4 women came up and said, hey, we're students here and we're really interested in, communism or, all this stuff. And later to find out, well, no, they weren't. They were members of the cult. They lied to you. They started off that relationship lying to you, and you were writing poetry and being, you were interested in free love and cool ass shit. And now you want to like go own your own country and bomb people.
They send the attractive women in to lay the foundation. What college dude is going to say no to that?
Gross.
It is. So, you alluded to this. Let's answer the question. Are cults legal? This is from an hg.org. It's a website that provides legal answers and resources. And so the answer, unfortunately, is a lot more complicated than it might appear. I think a lot of people assume cults are legal because of the First Amendment, right? There's that free exercise of religion and speech, etc. Mm-hmm. But in fact, some cults actually are illegal. Others are protected by the First Amendment, but their activities may not be. So what constitutes an illegal cult, according to this article, is they say it's very rare for any religious group to be rendered illegal in the United States. So if it's a religious cult, as many of them are, they fall into this distinction. So this is due to the legal protections provided by the First Amendment freedom of religious exercise protection contained in the Constitution. So, the First Amendment, it protects us from interference in our religious beliefs and practices. However, with any right, the freedom of religion can be abridged if the exercise infringes on the rights of others. Okay, so as a result, several groups have been made into recognized criminal organizations. This is not common, though. It has occurred on occasion, typically after a cult group has been involved with a criminal enterprise. These cults have generally been involved with activities like murder and abduction, statutory rape, or other serious crimes. So for the most part, cults aren't illegal. So you as a parent, for instance, like the parents that we saw in Love Has Won, or any other documentary which shows the parents of children who have joined cults, there's very little recourse.
Because they think you're over 18, you have the right to decide, and you can do whatever you want.
And the First Amendment protects these organizations unless you can prove any of the wrongdoing, the illegal shit that I mentioned, in the last paragraph.
Well, but so many of them involve children under the age of 18.
Well, once there's proof of that, then yes, you can go in and do something, it sounds like. If you can prove there's statutory rape, pedophilia, murder, any of those things, then I think it might be an FBI thing. The FBI or the local authorities can get involved.
Well, and it's sad that, again, we're obviously huge proponents of the First Amendment, but it's sad to me that most of the reason these cults get caught is for financial fraud.
Yeah.
And, again, that it's that thing of, understanding brainwashing, and does that person actually have informed consent?
Yeah.
Do they actually agree to this? And are we valuing abuse as more than just physical?
Well, that's where the legal system, like the legal system, I think by and large takes things at face value. Because we've seen time and time again when the psychological aspect of any given legal case comes into play, it's a very constrained idea of what constitutes, for instance, criminally insane, right?
Yeah.
It really is, did you know right from wrong?
Yeah.
Which to me, that's not not insanity. Like,
I know.
So it's really like the legal lens is a very constrained one. And to an extent, I get it, especially if you have somebody over the age of 18 saying, I am here willingly.
Yeah.
I want to be here. What are you supposed to do? All you can do is report back to the concerned people that reported this cult in the first place and say, I talked to your daughter, whatever.
Yeah.
They said they're fine.
Yeah.
Leave them alone.
They're being fed, they're housed, they're clothed.
Right.
They're well, and I think that's the key here is that, this is something you truly have to educate yourself on and be aware of. And, Steve Hassan was saying that, his father said, he was in a car accident doing something for this cult and had to go to the hospital and was there for a couple of weeks. And
that's a good thing.
I know. He was isolated. There was before cell phones, no one can get a hold of him. And his dad said, let me show you some things. And if you want to go back, you absolutely can. But give me 1 week.
It's a good approach.
Yeah.
I like it. So what to do about cults on that tip? We're gonna list some resources, right? If you were a member of a cult and you're struggling, if you're a family member who has a loved one in a cult, there are resources. You can find a list of attorneys in your area. You can, there's a ton of organizations I found that work with survivors of cults. So there's information out there, even though legally there's not much you can do. And, we'll leave you with this final thought. We as human beings love to judge. Me and Carolyn are very judgmental. When we learn about a cult and its members... Because we care. But when we learn about a cult and its members, most of us think that could never be me. Right? It's the same thing with crime victims. That could never be me. That would never happen to me. Unless you digest true crime on the regular like I do. And you're like, this could happen to anyone. I trust no one. Like Fox Mulder. I think when it comes to this judgmental way of thinking, I always think, there by the grace of God go I, right? I'm just fortunate that this hasn't happened to me. And you try to have some empathy. And if you got anything from this episode, we hope that it's just that. Feel some empathy for the people who find themselves involved with cults. On the outside looking in, cults are scary. But to someone who may be missing something key in their lives, someone who has never felt included or genuinely loved and appreciated, joining a cult might actually sound like an ideal way to get what all of us crave as humans, which is love, acceptance, and inclusion. So, glass houses, stones, all that shit, right? So we hope you enjoyed this, somewhat deeper dive into cults, because we've danced around it a bit. We felt it was high time that we got into it, and we do want to make sure, I wanted to make sure first and foremost that no one thought that we were ever condemning people who become cult members. I will no longer say joining cults, because I think we most of us could potentially end up in a situation like this, depending on, what shit is being spouted.
Yeah. And if you don't think it could be you, then do it for your future child or a friend who could end up that way.
That's right.
And look out for each other.
Look out for each other, dog. What did Jerry Springer say? Take care of yourselves and each other. Thanks, Jerry.
Now I want pudding, though.
I do too.
What do you have?
I'm going to eat some chocolate pudding. You all enjoy, and we'll see you next week.
Bye.
Bye. Oh, dude, I haven't had chocolate pudding in so long.